So today is the 28th, I think, of June, Sunday. And basically, I wanted to do this video because not to go back and talk about the past and all that, but just to kind of just talk a little bit about how this awakening is happening, how people are really, I feel from things happening around me, things that I see. And I'm sorry if I look a little sticky or like whatever. It is super hot out here in France. Like all the cat hairs are stuck on me and all that. But anyways, just to kind and even that is part of this whole situation, because I even feel like this whole heat wave and everything could possibly be just something trying to slow down the masses and have us distracted, because I personally, with this heat, I'm even struggling to come on and like do videos because it's too hot to like even put on makeup or do anything, right? So I was just remembering, going back to a lot of things that have happened, how I've seen even just, and I can only speak about myself, my algorithm reacting, me seeing how people in Simlandia are reacting, just kind of seeing how the collective is kind of like repeating similar things that I have mentioned, which doesn't mean that like everybody's watching me, obviously not, because I'm shadow banned. But what I'm trying to say is it's as if the same way I am awakening, and I guess other light workers are awakening, and it's just, you could just see that like we're going on higher timelines, right? The conversation and the topics, at least that are popping up in my algorithm, are all reflective of a lot of things that I've spoken about a couple months ago, or that I've been talking about, or whatever. Okay. It could just be that like people say, well, that's your algorithm because that's what you like to look at and all this. But I've done other videos where I've already spoken to you about AI and the algorithms, and even just the concept of how we invest our consciousness into certain things, right? How we invest like our energy into things. When I have, and I've already spoken about this, like sometimes when I am watching lives, okay, you might believe this, you might not, but definitely, that whole idea that people could be in different places at the same time, and it's night over there, it's day over here, you're in one country, you can go to another country in an instant, because everybody now has the ability to be able to go live on TikTok, right? Believe it or not, okay, that whole experience, and I will say this, you might believe it or you might not, like I really do feel that in Simlandia, in the Matrix, they know, at least in my case, when my consciousness is focused on their what do you call it, on their live, right? They know when you're watching. And I've spoken about this in other videos, and it sounds kooky, but I've even shown my kids like certain similar things, even just my consciousness focused in certain lives in certain areas, and I'll hear the Matrix sirens go off, right? And if you don't know what I'm talking about as far as the Matrix sirens, I've done videos on this as well, where I have explained how many times, depending on what I'm doing, especially if I go around things in the Matrix, I will automatically hear sirens. And I didn't think of this on my own. It was actually another TikToker in Canada who pointed that out. He was talking about something, and then sirens started to go off. And he's like, you hear that? Every time you hear certain sirens going off in the Matrix, that means like you're bypassing something, right? So I definitely started to notice that in my reality with a lot of things. I just noticed, like when I would go to, every single time I would go to the bank, take out money, and it doesn't always have to be a siren from a police car. It could be an ambulance, whatever, fire truck. But there's always this kind of like siren in the Matrix, whereas like to the point now when I'm doing certain things, it coincides too closely where I can just tell my kids, you hear the Matrix? Anytime we do something where like I catch someone doing something, or I go around something that was meant to block me in the Matrix. So the bottom line is, right, over the past months, the simulation has really revealed itself and shown itself in such a way that it takes a little bit of tact how to balance it, right? Because at the end of the day, I could tell you all the different things that happen to me. There are people I don't know who watches my videos, who watches my content. Because Simlandia sure seems to be knowing everything, but let's imagine that these videos that I make and this content that I made are for other people who maybe are like me, that they do not rewind in their heads, or that and when I say do not rewind in their heads, again, I'm going into that whole concept that it seems as if in Simlandia, they know your thoughts, they can see everything you've done. It's as if in this simulation, the individuals in this simulation have this possibility, okay? Which goes into the other thing where I guess as the veil is dropping, everybody's figuring out who's who in this matrix, right? We already knew that there were reptilians. We already knew that there were these folks eating children and all that. So that has been in our faces, but I think, it's only recently that you're hearing more people talking about like star seeds, whatever. I don't know if I'm a star seed or not. I'm just telling you that I don't do what everybody else up in this matrix can do, which is pretty interesting, to the point, like, because, I don't like to create like a division that I'm this or that, because I do feel that we're all just children of God. We're children of the Most High. So as long as, we all have that spark from the Most High, then we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless, right? And I guess that's why I incarnated down here. I guess that's why we're all here, little old me. Never in a million years, if you would have told a younger me born in 1984 in the 90s, like, hey, all of these things are going to happen in your life. I could tell you right now, like, I had wanted to live the most boring life, just be a teacher. Probably would have just married somebody else, like from another social job. I don't know. It could have been like, imagine a police officer, which now in this day and age, I probably would never. But it's not to talk bad about them as a profession. I'm just saying that, like, I wanted the most boring life in that sense, right? And it has been a whirlwind. I guess I came and I thought I was going to just fit into the matrix and have like a boring life and retire and just do everything like the other folks around me. Lo and behold, I figure out now that I guess I came to be here during this big ascension and awakening process, and my life was not meant to, be like everybody else's and fit in, all right? So in my book, okay, Chosen by God, Targeted by the Devil, I talk about a lot of things that happened to me. I even sometimes have to reflect because, again, a lot of the things that happened to me in my awakening and all this, again, happened here in the Mediterranean and Europe. But again, this matrix knows who's who. They know you by your frequency. And because they probably go jumping timelines and they see things that are going to happen in the future, who knows? They already, and I've heard this also from other guests that I've had on my podcast that talk about them having oracles specifically to kind of know certain things, right? So granted, let's say I decided to join certain families. I decided to maybe incarnate into a certain bloodline, a certain family, whatever. Interesting enough, the family that I incarnated into, I have a very big mix up going on, right? Because neither parents are from the same country. So as a child, I never really felt like one thing or the other more per se. And then, you're American. And then, half of my life I've lived in America. Now half of my life I can say I've lived in the Mediterranean. And then I was in Barcelona, I was in Spain, and then that's a different culture there. And then now I ended up in France. It's just a lot of like mix-ups, right? Just a lot of like, I don't fit into any box, put it that way, which is probably that was the idea, because that way you never quite fall asleep into narratives, right? Could be. The point is, the Matrix knows who we are. Now, imagine, because I remember when I was a child, I used to have a lot of interesting dreams. And I recall I would have dreams of being like chased into bathrooms and gunned down. And this was before I came to Europe. I would have these kind of dreams, and I always thought that was like interesting. Or I would have like really scary dreams of like something trying to, like some kind of demonic figure trying to pull me under beds. I've always had sleep paralysis when I lived with my mom, because I already told you that she's a heavy narcissist, and they have that is a demonic attachment situation, right? So yeah, so after I left my mom's home, I stopped having sleep paralysis as much, and I can count on my hands how many times I've had sleep paralysis since, growing up and leaving her home. So all these things I notice, a lot of people who, I guess they have callings on their lives, they've spoken about this, that you start to have these situations happen to you from the time you were a child. There was a time when I was heavily into going to go get the tarot read. I used to have my own tarot cards, but I mean, obviously I wasn't an expert, so I would go to Baleras and all of this, and I write about this in my book. I don't do that anymore, obviously, because also as I started praying, as I started fasting and praying and getting closer to God, like I just realized, like, you don't even need anyone from outside of you to like have to tell you anything. There's certain things that if you grow close to the Holy Spirit, you will just have that discernment, right? You won't need anyone to tell you if yes or no. You'll just start to recognize things. So my feeling is, I don't tell anybody what they need to do with in their life, because I feel like everybody's on their own journey. But like for me, it's something that like I don't advocate or push, because again, I just feel that it's something that you should always be independent, right? You shouldn't have to be under anybody, or no one should have to dictate to you what you should, you shouldn't have to be dependent on anyone else for your own spiritual guidance per se. Okay. At least, on a long-term basis, maybe in the beginning, if you're just getting started, but then afterwards you should be able to tap in by yourself. So anyway, so all these things, even I remember one of the things that the balera told me, right, when she read how should I say, she read the cigar. She was really good at doing different types of, she was actually Venezuelan, so she was very good at doing different types of, how should I say, I don't even remember how to say this in English. Anyways, at fortune telling, right? So she would usually use like the little bones that they use in Santeria. I mean, I had started going to all these kind of women like when I turned like 19. When I was younger, I don't know if it was just something about me. I remember like I would be a witch for every Halloween. Interesting enough that I used to like a lot of those movies on Disney and all of this. I mean, that could just be indicative of the fact that like it could just be that I was always, let's say, a spiritual person, but at a young age, because I had no guidance and I didn't know really what was going on. The enemy, you're watching Disney, you're watching all these things, it lures you into a different direction. Granted, the enemy would probably love if people who I guess are like me, who maybe have a high level of spirituality, turn to the dark side. They would probably love that, or these demonic figures and all that. But no, I think I was always born ready to be a warrior for Christ. Okay. I was the one who like I said, in my book, like I was the one who chose to be Catholic. I asked to be baptized when I was like 7 years old. I was going to Catholic school. So I made my decision, right? At 7 years old, I wanted to join the Catholic Church. And anyways, going off on tangents. So one of the things that this balera told me, and she was there when I was in Barcelona going through a lot of spiritual warfare with my daughter's father, because they were definitely sending a lot of witchcraft nonstop at me, throwing all sorts of things at me. And I didn't know what to do at that point. Like, every single time I had to go get a cleansing or something like this, I would have to spend money on top of that. And I remember like when she read me the cigar one, she even said like someone didn't want you to be born, or something happened. Like someone tried to do something so that you wouldn't be born in your mother's womb. I don't know. My mom never told me that story. I did try to mention it to her once, and she tried to like dismiss it. She goes, like, I don't know. So I can't confirm or deny, okay? But like all these kind of things happen usually when they say people have a calling on their life. The Matrix knows that they're, I guess, people coming in here to be the nodes on the Matrix to harness the higher frequency, which was always destined to happen. Okay, they know that their time was running out. So this whole situation that happened to me when I was here in the Mediterranean, and I go into it in the book, how I was living in this studio and I had come back from New York with both of my kids, because my son was born in New York, but I had been already in Spain 5 years because of her father. He said, let's go back to New York. Let's go. And everything about the way things were done, even when he left me, he made sure it was after I committed and I got an apartment. Basically, I really just felt that whatever was going on, the Matrix was always, was purposefully trying to get me to go back to New York. They wanted me to stay in my Matrix region. And I always speak about in my videos how, had I stayed in New York, possibly I would not have awoken to the degree that I've awoken now, because you see all the things in America they try to do to keep us in low vibration, between the food, between the violence, between the distractions. So fortunately for me, I realized when I came back with him and I saw that he was like, not going to help and everything like this. And I said, okay, well, I'm going back to Spain. I said, for me to stay broke in New York, I might as well just be broke in the Mediterranean and be able to go to the beach, because, that was my thinking. So, who knows if part of the reason why I feel, and I do feel like their father is like demonic, because I feel like in Simlandia, you have all these little parasitics and they know who they are among each other and they know what's going on. So this was before the narrative started. So I even remember when, after I started awakening, and I have videos about that where I started reflecting, and I remember when I was in New York and I was in the apartment, and I had caught like people, like a guy sitting outside of my apartment door when I was leaving, as if he was on a phone, like monitoring something. So, in the moment I didn't think about it, and I didn't think about that for a long time, until I just started trying to think back, like, well, when is really the first time you started seeing like weird stuff happen? And I will say that was a very interesting moment that I do recall happen, where like somebody had a phone and it was as if they were outside your apartment, as if they're monitoring you. And then I remembered that those things started happening in Barcelona like way later, but that was the first time. So who knows if this Matrix knew that I was going to activate, and that as I activated, if there was some kind of narrative that they had tied to me. And I know I'm saying this to you because, again, as I've mentioned, the narrative for me has always tried to accuse me of being some kind of snitch or something for the police, or some kind of snitch. So imagine, let's say that this was going to be the narrative, and that the Matrix already assigned that to me, because going back to the dreams that I had when I was younger, imagine if, because that was going to be what was in store for me, to try to keep me distracted or whatever like this, and that was going to be done maybe in New York, but then I decided to switch it up and I went to Europe. Then the objective was always to get me back to my region in New York, because if I started to activate in Europe, it would be worse, because then, of course, you start activating everybody else around you. So I'm thinking about it from this perspective because it's very interesting. I noticed once when I was watching, a live, and you might believe this or you might not believe this. Okay, now I was watching the live and I heard them start simming as the person in the camera was going through the area, and it was a video, and it was a TikTok in DR. It wasn't in Europe, where any so I have years I haven't been to Dominican Republic, and of course I've only been there like maybe 3 or 4 times in my entire life. So it's just interesting that I heard a little bit of simming with the same hive mind accusations that I've heard around Europe. And you might say like, nah, she's off her rocker. How can that be? But I'm gonna just also say that when we are watching these lives, when we are watching lives on TikTok, okay, I can only compare it to the situation I had when I had an outer body experience after I started meditating a lot, before I went back to New York, like in 2007, 8, 9, whatever. I started meditating, and I had an outer body experience where like you just see everything in front of you, and then it's like the more you stare at it, the more you just kind of move towards it. But when you're watching a live, that's exactly the same kind of feeling. You are just focusing in through someone else's lens in any part of the world, and you're watching, and it's as if that's what you're absorbing. You are instantly being transported to that zone, to that area. And I don't know that part. I won't say that I know for sure. I don't know if like the Matrix picks it up, and then it's as if the Matrix thinks that you're really there, because your consciousness is really there. So what I would notice when I'm watching sometimes some of these lives, I would notice the sirens in the Matrix in certain areas, like weird things happen, and you can believe that, or I mean, that's besides the point. The point is you could believe that or not. I would see sometimes some of the hosts get nervous, like if I joined their live, you could believe that or not, whatever. But I really sat down and I've been studying that one, right? And again, supposedly, if that's not the case and it's just like whatever, and then it's the real world, and then it shouldn't matter anyways, because then I'm just watching a live like I would be watching a live, like I've always been watching lives for whatever. It's interesting that only recently, as I started to notice it, then I started to notice certain reactions from individuals. But before, I watched lives many times and I didn't notice that before. It could be maybe I wasn't awake, or maybe I don't know how the Matrix works in terms of when you start recognizing things. So you can believe that, or you might not want to believe that, okay? The idea is, if that was supposed to be my narrative, right? And that's the whole reason why they wanted me to go to New York, because again, depending where I'm at, where I'm located, if the parasitic hive mind recognizes me, and I have somehow had that encrypted into my sim, right, in this reality, then they're going to start exposing themselves, because that wouldn't make sense, right? That you are in a completely different location where nothing has happened, that nobody would know, and then they just start talking and reacting. They become reactive to my presence, which exposes them as this parasitic hive mind that we have surrounding us in this simulation. Interesting. That's my theory. Okay, so that's why I really think that they were trying really hard to get me out of the Mediterranean, Barcelona. And then, like I said, when I came to France, they started to like act like, oh, it's just a joke. But they didn't change their narrative. They weren't changing their narrative. Like, you could be like, nobody knows me here, nobody this or that. And they still were repeating things that it would be impossible for them to know based on the location, regardless, whatever. Again, I understand the concept of the Truman Show. But the thing is, regardless if it is a Truman Show, then it's very clear that the narrative doesn't make sense and is not true. So the fact that they keep repeating it means that they're not in control of what they're repeating. They're just like a demonic hive mind scripted to react that way. Who knows if I had stayed in New York, if I would have like really, because you're not awakening and you're just seeing all, you're hearing this, and then people say like, no, she's schizophrenic. No, she's good. How many people in New York, especially in New York, that you see all these folks out there, and we just say, oh, they're crazy. Like, sometimes they be dropping like real, like, jewels in speaking and saying things that don't sound like they were always crazy. You just wonder, like, like what went wrong? We don't know what the Matrix did to them. Okay. because you know that the devil is out here trying to rob, kill, and destroy. And I do personally feel that in America we have a certain level of soul that is forced to incarnate in that area, especially if especially if we've reincarnated a lot and we have a higher possibility of awakening. So that's what I think, okay? In comparison to other areas of the world. So basically, in my feeling, I don't know, when I ended up here in France, again, I always tell the story of what happened to me in Barcelona, and I'm always honest about all of the details. And just so that you don't think, and I'm going to add, now I'm doing this video, but I'm going to add a little portion where I show you like a little bit more receipts, right? When I was in Barcelona and the narrative started, remember that it started right after the pandemic. Right after the pandemic. A lot of people's lives changed right after the pandemic. I don't know what CERN was doing. I don't know, but a lot of crazy stuff started happening after the pandemic. It was like months after the pandemic. So it was going into, I would say my daughter was born October 1919. And then right after that, a couple months was the pandemic. And then it was 2020. Yeah. Because that was the summer of 2020 when they did this to me, when and now when I look at it, I'm gonna tell it from like a real world perspective, but I'm also going to show you symbolically also from a simulation perspective, right? So from a real world perspective, and this is not to go back into the same thing and remembering the same thing, but I think it's central overall to just kind of like how far we've come now in the awakening, right? So I didn't know what was going on. I had gone back to Barcelona from New York with my kids. I had been renting rooms, and I finally got my first studio apartment, and I got it in a poor neighborhood. So the neighborhood was notorious. It has always been notorious, but the street in particular that I got the studio in, that would give me a studio with just, I didn't have papers in that exact moment because I had to redo my residency and everything because of my daughter's father. And going with him back to New York, I lost all of the things. He was like a disruptor. He was a distraction. Mind you, it's precisely after I brought his other daughter and I decided that I didn't want to have anything to do with him. Remember that they had been like for now years sending, even up until like these kids, like up until now, they still were sending a lot of witchcraft. But, at that time, let's say my daughter was like 7 when this happened. So for like 7 years, they were still like doing a lot of stuff. And I had finally decided, you know what, like, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy. In that process of like, goodbye, that's when I got pregnant with my daughter, my youngest daughter from him. And sometimes they say like, when you have a child with someone, it creates another 7 years of attachment. I don't know, because it was definitely interesting that I got pregnant. And it's not to say that, it's interesting. We know how people get pregnant, but I'm just saying that everything was very peculiar, like purposefully done. And it was precisely when I decided like I didn't want to have anything to do with him, that I was over him. And I started to like look at other people. It's precisely like when the Matrix was like, oh, he can't be a distraction anymore. Now we got to come at her harder. It was something like this. You know what I mean? And then that's when all of a sudden, like what I speak about, like I just remember that like I was in the street and then these police officers like try to follow me into the building where we live, or they followed me. And that wasn't so much the issue. The issue was that even before that day that happened, there was a character, and I'm going to talk about him because he's going to be in the video that I'm going to show you. So I love the fact that, after some of the Sims, I'm going to call them Sims, sold out and they did this and they participated in this. I don't think they thought it was going to blow up. I think they just thought it was going to be something small that they were just going to get away with and no one would talk about it. I really don't think some of them thought that it was going to be like what it is now. Or, what I saw was happening in Barcelona before I left, right? In Simlandia. But there was one guy, and this guy was like new to the area because in all the 3 years, this happened after 3 years of me living in that apartment. I had never seen this guy on that block before. It's like he just showed up. And I always say this, that in the Matrix, even as I moved on and I got good jobs, every time like something weird would happen at the job, or it would always be like a new person would arrive to like bring that hive mind mentality, like the parasitic mentality, into the area to like start stuff. So this guy had never seen him before. He just appeared on the block. He started hanging out in the block. He was always on the block, always on the block. And I would hear him sometimes outside starting to say things or acting weird, like when I would pass by, or doing things like I know like once he tried to like squeeze my kid's arm or something like this when they were roller skating in the street. Like he I would say he was the one that was like sent like an agent to like throw fire into the mix, right? And then like now when I think about although it was really hard in that street because there were a lot of just hooligans running around, I do recall like sometimes I'd be going down the block and I would see like they were like sending whistling messages to each other, to like, but I didn't catch on that it was me either because I wasn't focused on that way. So the day that the cops followed me in, I distinctly heard him after that outside saying like, what if she's the one, you see? And you know how I know? Because before that, again, I would hear him saying those kind of things like about me or something like this. And he didn't know me. He didn't know me. Like, that's why it was like weird. But I just said, well, maybe he just thinks that like he's just stupid because he was always outside smoking. But no, he was an agent. He was a little parasitic agent. And I heard him sometimes trying to tell the other neighbors, like Sims downstairs, and they would be like, no, I think you just need to like, they would tell him like, no, you're just like obsessed with her or something like that. Like, you're just like always like thinking about, you know what I'm saying? So it's interesting that it had to take like something stronger, as if like they had to do something stronger to make the narrative feel more real, even to the Sims that were there. And then remember, the narrative in my case, they try to say that I took something from the building. When right after the police followed me in, there was an altercation in the building with another girl who was in the building with her boyfriend, and the police came back again, and then that was when they started like doing fusses and acting like something went missing. And in the end, supposedly it was the girl in the building, from the real world perspective. She's also a little parasitic, but let's just say that she has attachments because she was like a drug addict. Anyways, she supposedly stole whatever was in the building, but keep in mind that these Sims sell out. So I know these Sims sell out because when there was another altercation with me and this girl in the building later on, and it's all in my book where I go into it, and I went to go press charges and I had to go to court. That was the first time I actually heard simming, where I had dropped my kids off at school and I heard these two guys, like one was on a balcony, one was downstairs, and he's like, oh, when is the trial? And they were like, oh, at 10. And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. They're talking about a trial, but I didn't think it was mine because mine started at 9. But then when I got there, they told me the judge was going to be late and then it wasn't going to start till 10. So then I was like, oh, and now I can look back and see how all of these individuals, because remember the trial was against this girl, so that would mean that she is being supported or backed by whoever these folks were in the street. Just archonic Sims. I don't know if they were like RoboCops. I don't know if they were undercover. I don't know, but they were like, that was the first time I heard simming, and they were passing by. And I go into also how like when I was working in the school in Barcelona, I heard the other teachers saying like, did you get the SMS from the cop? And they started acting weird around me and just doing weird stuff, right? So in the small town where I lived, I remember, I'm just going over like the quote unquote real world things that I observed, okay, before I go into from the simulation perspective. It took me being in the small little town in the mountains, and I guess the little Sims there, when I was passing by, like I would hear them like simming, and I don't know if they did it on purpose, obviously maybe when I was passing by, because at that point I was still kind of like not aware, but now I can just say, well, maybe they just did it when they knew I was passing by. They would say like, well, it's the Guardia Urbana is saying that it's the other police Mossos, and the Mossos are saying, like, as if there was this big like strange thing going on, right? And then there's even a scene, not a scene, there's even a moment that I actually I wrote about, like I kind of put it into my other book, Unscripted, because Unscripted, a glitch in her story, is really based on a lot of the actual incidences that I had, that I tried to put into the story, because I feel like people accept things when you say that it's fiction, versus if I were to really tell you like, oh my God, this is exactly what was happening, people would be like, So I kind of put the incidences in that book, but I put like the real world situation in Chosen by God and Targeted by the Devil. So I was overhearing the Sims, and they were like saying things like this, and then but I could hear that the other Sims were outside of the house, as if they were paid to monitor me in my home, and they were just doing weird things in the hallway with the phone. And then that's when I started seeing the same thing after I came here to France, the same exact thing. And like I said, so that's how you start to see like, no, this doesn't even make sense. So they were just doing things. I remember one of the Sims outside, like they would say, oh yeah, you pay me and I pay, and then they were like this girl doesn't do anything, like she's always in her house. Like they said something like that, like where it was very clear that obviously whatever lie the Sims were being told wasn't necessarily the case, right? And I really felt like when I was in Barcelona, because they knew that some of the stuff were like lies, they just wanted to try to make me feel like I was like crazy and like do things to me, especially because they kept getting caught and I was like catching them and getting proof. Then they just wanted to try to do things like, and I talk about how the Matrix does this, like if I was catching on to like what the people in my neighborhood was doing, then at my job they would start acting weird. And coming to France and being someone who stays working at home, I saw it even more. I saw it to a higher degree, because now you're completely isolated. Now you're completely away from everybody. So you could see everything laid out, and you could see like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That's a distraction. But when you're in a city, and I keep saying this, it's harder in the city to see it. Okay. Cities are energy harvesting areas. It's harder to see it. But even the other day I was watching a live in Barcelona now, because sometimes I do that, because I say, let me see if I could pick out like when they're popping out. I saw a couple of moments where the person was walking, and I saw how the Sims would pop out of their doors, or they would pop out. So then I can see sometimes, but it is hard. It is hard. So the point is, going back to the real world stuff that was happening, right? You can read my book that I talk about, like I left that studio apartment. I didn't move far. I went to another apartment in the area, and for like a couple of years, it was even like toned down. It only picked up again once I started to try to do the trial against the girl, because there was an altercation with her like a couple months after all of that happened. It's all in the book. But I'm just saying that, that was the only time when the Matrix would pick up, is when I had proof and I can real world get people in trouble, right? So what they would do is like, they would just spread the rumor into different hive minds, it appeared, or more and more parasitics that were entering these vessels in this area from the different subsets of nationalities started to also hear the same rumor. I don't know how they were spreading it or what they were doing, but they were just doing their own thing. And you might think like, no, maybe that sounds too far-fetched. It's all in your head. I'm going to put a clip of a song that in that video, everybody who's in that video participated. Not everybody. There were like either two people in that video, which I'll probably like circle to show you, like, these were the only two individuals that like one of them actually defended me, and he was like probably under 18, the only one that tried to stand up to a whole bunch of like thugs on the corner and say like, no, she's not like that. And I guess they spoke over him because he was young, and you know, they intimidated him. And another guy who also, they said no, that she wouldn't do that, right? That wasn't any snitch for the neighborhood. And then there were other people in that video that they were nice to me before, but then they just kind of, you know, and then I know the ones that like they sold out. Like they definitely knew that it wasn't me, and they knew that it was the other chick that was like doing stuff in the building, but they sold out to the Matrix, as many Sims like to do, right? So mind you, we still had to see each other because it was the same neighborhood. But interesting enough, they did that song. And you might say like, well, that song isn't exactly, because they didn't literally say specific things, but they tried to make it very clear that it was like geared towards me. I guess like what I heard was that after everything went down, that they were very scared, the Sims, because they started simming on purpose, making it clear as if they could see me, or using their phone as if they could see into my home and all this. And at the time I was thinking like, oh my God, they put camera. No, that's what they do in the Truman Show. So that means that these little Sims, again, they know who you are. All right. They know who, I guess, has the real souls and all that, and they know who doesn't. So, again, you might think like, no, whatever. The person who did that rap song later on, he did another one called Voodoo. And he's not a big rapper. His name is like MD May, whatever. He's not a big rapper, but he was doing some songs and he's from that neighborhood. And he did another song called Voodoo, right? And it's interesting because I wasn't talking to other people, but I had like one friend, and I remember at that time I was like very bitter about all of it, especially the song, and you know, people trying to like ruin your reputation. And I said to this guy, you know, I'm gonna get some freaking black candles, and I'm gonna like wish him the worst in my kitchen or something. Where I printed out pictures of him and all this, and I swear to you, because I was in a place that I was really upset about it, and the idea that, you know, I guess like they just thought him like, yeah, just make a rap song about it, everybody will believe it, like, you know, that kind of thing. And then he wrote a song saying they're trying to do voodoo to him. So I'm just letting you know, you can go look up these things on YouTube, you know, and it's not in my head, right? So that's how that started. And they did that video maybe 2 months after I left that apartment, to kind of, I guess, cover themselves, because they knew what they did. And I heard from another friend like that they were like really scared, like, but they participated in trying to make me look bad, right? And besides this, right, again, I wanted to say that if you look at it from a simulation perspective, after that, it was toned down. And then it was like in 2023, I don't know, in that neighborhood, I was never, to my knowledge, I was never accused again, ever, of anything like that, or being a snitch or anything. And it was like in Barcelona, as if, what I felt and what I put in one of my videos in TikTok is as if like different like gangs were like just blaming me, and saying that I did it, and I wasn't even like around, like, I don't know, that's how I felt. And it was weird. And I was living in the mountains and everything. So mind you, again, that whole thing of like, whatever the story they tell to the Sims to cover up the fact that in this reality exists other beings, right? So who knows, let's say in Simlandia, what they were telling them. They're like, no, she can see through her eyes and do this. Who knows what they tried to lie and say, right? But the idea is that, you know, in Barcelona, and this goes to what I'm talking about, I myself, let's say, you know, I'm supposed to be here changing the frequency or whatever. let's say that there are other people also, like tourists and other people, because Barcelona became very populated with a lot of different tourists, okay? And there are people coming from different matrices, let's say, different ways of thinking coming in. And, you start to see this kind of pushback in Barcelona where people start saying, like, tourists go home. They don't want any tourists here. And you think to yourself, like, how is that possible? Because Barcelona lives off of tourism, right? But it's as if they don't want any other energy matrix sold individuals entering that little region. That's what I'm thinking. And that's how I feel now, seeing everything. After I left Barcelona, I came to France, and I landed in this area in France because it just because this was the only area where there was a booking that allowed me to stay with cats. I'll just say that in my head, that was like a last minute decision, and I just feel like God said France. France is where it's going to go down. That's what I heard, and that's what they say, right? Many souls are going to be saved in France. France is very central to this awakening and all of this. So these are very Christic lands, very, very ancient Christian lands as well here in France. So anyways, but I guess the Lord kept me in Barcelona close by until it was the moment to move. And, certain things, the Lord allows certain things. It's all part of your awakening, all part of the process, right? If you were to ask me, would you like it to have been different? Like at this point, like, no. Like, I'd rather know everything I know now about this reality and sound as crazy as whatever you want to say, but know what I know. And again, at least I'm not like these folks that run around looking crazy, eating children out there and people don't say that they look crazy, right? But when I am telling you this, all of a sudden people are like shying away. Anyways, so when I came to France and I started seeing the same thing was happening, I was like, okay, that's weird. Who knows if by me or other people who arrive in Barcelona from America, from all these other different matrices, they change the frequency, they change a lot of things energetically in that region. And that's not what the parasitics want. They want that to be like a stronghold for them. They want that to be like where they can be, right? So in all the years that I was living in Barcelona, from 2007 until a little bit before I left, okay, you did not hear of shootings. I could count on my hand how many shootings I had heard of in all those years. And right before I came to France, that's one of the things that kind of like shook me up, because I was like hearing like that there was this guy and his son was going to a nice, good school, like kind of like the kind of IB schools that I was like working in. And he got shot outside of a cafe, and they said that he was Spanish, but he had ties to some narc stuff. And then like I heard, at that time I didn't know I was hearing simming, but I was hearing simming, and I heard the other sims like saying, oh, you see? And it was as if like the ones that like, I guess were like defending me, like they were like, like, I don't know what was going on, but it was as if like, I felt like I was being used as a scapegoat or something. I guess, imagine, I said in Simlandia, imagine they say like, hey, blame it on the chosen one over there, because she's anointed, and you can't, and we could just say it's her and you can't touch her. You know what I'm trying to say? Something like this, I feel like these little demons were doing in Simlandia. And you might say to yourself like, Dolly, that sounds so far-fetched. But what happened, like I've been in France a year, and I'm going to put up clips so that you can see in a year's time, all of these weird shootings have happened, as if like, and I'm not going to say like I'm the only light worker, I'm the only one harnessing the energy, but like I think to myself, I'm like, imagine that, like, not only because I'm not there anymore, no one can use you as a scapegoat, but also just imagine that you were, adding to that light energy, and that's like one less. And then who knows if all the people who they're like shooting up and all these things are like other like people who are like sold individuals that are meant to be holding up the energy and all that. And they are just running amok in Barcelona right now. Like all of these shootings all of a sudden, and since when and how? And then they keep saying that there's this drug war. And they keep saying that now everybody's using, like from Mexico to Russia to Serbia. Like it used to be that you only saw a couple of guys on the streets between certain nationalities. Now they're making it into this kind of narrative that it's like this huge thing. You know what I mean? So all of that in a year's time since I haven't been there. So it's interesting that was kind of like the narrative, like they were trying to, I feel, in things that I was hearing people say about me, like pull me in. People were simming about me. So you have the book that I've written. You could go check videos that I've posted. And I think I've even posted here on YouTube of like what I was telling you and the date when I was telling it to you. That was the narrative and how I like, and then you can go check the news reports now in Barcelona and see that there's some kind of problem going on, you know, with like all of a sudden these like drug lords and shootings and all of this, just a year's time that I'm not in there, that I'm not there. I guess there's no scapegoat anymore. They're just running amok. I don't know. But since Simlandia was acting up with me, I still pray for many people in Barcelona because there are many good people with souls, and it's not fair that good people get trapped up, you know, trapped in that vibration with these parasitics, because the aim is to create a sensation that Barcelona is not safe, to keep, I also think, a lot of the tourists out so they could keep it as a stronghold, and you don't have people new coming in, bringing new ideas, new anything. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? It's part of the narrative to keep it like as a danger zone. Like, don't go there, don't visit there, stay away from here, all you new souled individuals from the Americas and all these places. That's what I feel like that they're doing, right? But yeah, but just in case you thought I was like, you know, it was just in my head, I'm gonna show you some receipts about that. So now we have grown past that, right? So now when I actually have seen that it doesn't matter where I look in some areas of Spain, like when I'm looking at lives or in certain countries, and you're hearing the same simming, then you see that it really probably wouldn't have mattered as much if you were to like, because what I remember they used to sim is like, they would say, let her go to Madrid. Let him go to Madrid. Go to Madrid. That was another running theme. Like they don't want them touching the waters of the Mediterranean. That little Mediterranean, that little area that touches all of these countries, okay, where that feminine divine energy is awakening. So they can't stop it. And everybody's been activated. Let's just say everybody's woken up. We're in the new earth. They've been revealed. So now, again, like I've said in other videos, they're just trying their luck. They're talking about aliens. They're talking about disclosure. Hell, I even think that this whole heat wave right here, happening specifically here in France, what are the odds? And I'm here this year to endure it, because I think in this town in Agde, I think that there was a moment that the river overflowed, and they said it hadn't overflowed since 1994. That happened, I think, this year or a little bit into last year. And then I'm here in France when there's like a big heat wave. And I'm not saying it has to do with me. I'm not saying I'm like some like deity or no. I'm just saying energetically, and as I keep saying, in Simlandia, as shadow banded as I am in the real world, in Simlandia, it's as if like, you know, they make it seem as if like everyone is seeing this and seeing that. I don't know. Y'all be seeing so much except the important things. So I hope, in other words, that because everybody's seeing all these little beings around us, and I'm seeing that it doesn't matter where in the world I look, if I look at an area that looks like it's a poor area or there's parasitics, whatever, they start repeating the same rhetoric, they start saying the same words, they start bringing up the same topics. You see that there's really, like, when people talk about like, oh, I'm being targeted, I'm being gang stopped, I need to move, like, there's nowhere to move. There's no one to call except on Jesus, because that's the only thing that I have seen bothers little demons, is the name Jesus, is the words of Jesus, is you praying to Jesus. So that I will tell you, all right? This is such a spiritual thing that's going on right now in this world, in this planet. And we are at the moment where we are separating the, how should I say, the tares from the wheat, or the wheat from the tares, however you want to say it. And, unfortunately, the little parasitics and the ones that have been accustomed to this system, if they like it, like I keep saying, like, if, when it comes down to it, especially for the individuals that don't want to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior and don't want to, I don't know, they don't want to leave their customs, their traditions. I understand that it's hard sometimes, but I'm just saying, like, then stay here. Y'all stay here in the 3D. You stay with these little demons. But I feel like the veil is being, definitely, it's allowing us to, they're exposing themselves. They've always told us things in our face. But I feel like, especially with me, like, I've seen them. And I've seen the way the hive mind works. And I've seen these parasitics out here on this side. And it's like the whole purpose of, like, seeing them is for you to be aware that this is what we've been under the control of. We've been under the control of these fiends, making our lives difficult, suffering, playing with our weather, playing with our food. When they don't know what to do and they see that the vibration and the energy is getting really high, creating heat waves, creating tsunamis, creating earthquakes, whatever they can do to create distractions. You know what I mean? This is what it's come down to. So, like, you really have to ask yourself, is that the world that you want to live in? Is that the world you want for your children, to be worried that they're going to be eaten and harvested? Is that what you want? Because every time you bow down to them, every time you accept, every time you participate with them, and you do these kind of things where you're covering your eyes and covering your mouth because you think that's how you're going to get more views, and that's how you're going to get your awards, and that's how you're going to become famous. One, you're making it harder for us to see which ones are the real demons versus the Sims that are just sellouts. But besides that, you are also participating in the suffering of your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. You're participating in upholding the matrix. And like I said, as far as I'm concerned, and I've said in other videos, you want to uphold this matrix, you go ahead, but you'll go down with it because it's down. This game has already been won by Jesus Christ. So you will go down with this matrix. It's just a matter of time, So it's really just to get those that are, I guess, are in the middle, and those that are completely asleep and don't know what is going on and how to feel about the things that they're starting to wake up and see, for you just to understand, you know what I mean? That it's not in your head, that this is really a simulation. And, it's a demonic, diabolical one at that has been basically doing everything in its power to keep us disaligned with the Most High, which is inside of us. Okay? The spark of greatness of the Most High, of love, whatever you want to call it, is inside of us. It is not outside of us. And these little demons, they don't have access to that energy, so they're dying out. And they're just trying to take as many of our souls with them as they can. So I want to know, are you going to allow them to take your soul down with them? That's all. And anyways, so I don't know. I just wanted to do this little video and talk about that. I honestly, I'm not going to lie, with the heat wave, of course, and I feel like that's what it's meant to do. It's like to slow us all down from all of our projects, from everything we're doing with this heat, so we could be like, because honestly, like with a heat like this, my cats are all laid out. Like, I only function for a good couple of hours in the morning, and then it's like, I feel like, I don't have a fan in here, so you feel like it's like horrible, that sticky, nasty feeling like you don't want to do anything, right? So all of that is orchestrated. I really do feel that. But it's not going to work. It's just like everything else. I can tell you a million ways that the Matrix has done all kinds of stuff to delay me and play these kind of games to make it just take longer. But at the end, you still get what you're going to get. Everybody's still going to rise, and their little behinds are going down into the flames of the 3D hell. They'll stay here, basically, because this is kind of like a hell. But you get what I'm trying to say. And anyways, and that's all I just wanted to post and speak to you about today.